Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Series with me, Kevin Britz, proudly powered by leadershipbydesign.co, leading the charge with insights, information, and ultimately effective results. Joining me in today's leadership and coaching segment, he holds a doctorate in behavioral science and he has his business called Psychonomics. Joining me today is Dr. Sean Smith. Dr. Sean, how are you doing?
Very good. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for having me. It's wonderful to be here, actually.
Yes, so the reason why I thought it would be a fantastic opportunity to have you on the show is you've created a new assessment that you could use out in the workforce. But before we dive straight into that, don't you want to give us a bit of background about you, about your business, what it is you do, and then we'll just move into that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I studied a master's degree in overseas. They call it experimental psychology. Here we call it research psychology. But essentially, we're empowered to make use of the quantities, qualities, etc., of the human condition, and not just make sense of it, but make constructive use of it. However, my compatriots all went into places like the Military Psychological Institute or the Medical Research Council and so on. I went straight into business. And so I did a lot in the space of consumer psychology, public relations research, a lot of work, socioeconomic type work for government. And then I ended up spending about 8 years or so in academia, teaching, researching, working with data, etc. And I realized that I needed to kind of bridge this profile of mine. So I did an honors degree in business, and then further I did a PhD in behavioral economics, which, for those who are not aware, is really just a super fringe branch of kind of a combination of psychology and microeconomics. And about 2 years ago, I broke away, started my own consultancy, and have worked with quite a few big corporations, but I've decided that I want to focus on building instruments now, building assessments, and helping people to work better out there. So there are currently 3 being released. One is for executives. The other is a 360, but it's really a different take on a 360. And the third, I think, is the one that you're most interested in. For those who are not aware, Kevin attended the accreditation process for that one, which is the Team and Workplace Dynamics Inventory. And it exists concurrently at the level of the individual worker within a team, as well as the team overall. So it's not just you for you, it's not just team for team, it's the dynamics of all of us within that working group. So I hope that maybe gives you the background you were looking for there, Kevin.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. So, I mean, for the acronym that we're going to be speaking about is the Team and Work Dynamics Inventory, is the TWADI sort of assessment that we're looking at. But could you start by giving us an overview of the TWADI assessment? What makes it unique in the landscape of behavioral assessments, and how does it integrate applied behavioral sciences, data analytics, and psychometrics in its methodology?
Yeah, so a lot of the thinking behind that was, first off, there are a lot of assessments out there, but firstly, they take a long time, okay? When I say a long time, some of them range between 30 minutes to 90 minutes for the respondent to actually click through. And for a lot of busy people in 2024, that's just, I mean, it's doable, but it's not great, right? Secondly, a lot of them are, as I said, I use the term me for me. So a psychometrist or a certified coach, someone like that, will sit you down and say, okay, so you are a very humorous person, or you're a very gregarious person, or a very conscientious person. And corporates spend millions on these assessments every year, but what is the point of that? What do we do with this as a working team? So my rationale was that everybody in corporate anyway, and also smaller businesses, but largely in corporate, everybody works in a team. Okay, undeniably so. Finance team, marketing team, HR team, whatever it might be. And a team is really not 60 people strong or 100 people strong. That's like a division, 1,000 people strong. You don't work with 1,000 people on a daily basis. You work with what, 8, 10, 12. And so that's where this is aimed, at those working clusters. So essentially the ethos is that if I can understand my working team better, if we can make these data points tangible, so we can plot them out on a chart and say, okay, that person is the resident outgoing kind of type. That one there is connected and has a real identity attached to this working group. That one really hates meetings. You know, can I just not send them that meeting request? Or whatever it might be. We've got 9 what we call global constructs, and we've got 23 sub-constructs. An assessment that takes 10 minutes to complete. When I say 10, we're averaging at about 9 minutes and I think 50 something seconds. But so it's between about 8 and 12 minutes. So it's not onerous for the respondent. And we're going to market only through certified coaches. We've got master coaches. We've also got a couple of industrial psychologists, but really reputable people. Okay. And so it's also not just here's your assessment result. It's going to lead to group coaching and it's not just for dysfunctional teams, it's for all teams. We can never not work better together, is the underpinning principle in philosophy. So, yeah.
So, I mean, if we're looking at the scientific foundation and development of the assessment itself, what was the process behind the development of TWADI's assessment, and how did your background and behavioral science and your team expertise contribute to its the creation of the assessment? And what were some of the challenges that you faced during the development process? Because to be able to get to this point where you breaking it down into the constructs and then sub-constructs, that's a lot of data that you've needed to kind of formulate and use and use towards creating an assessment like this.
Yeah, so I've taken a very keen interest in psychometrics. My doctorate actually was on that area. So for that particular study, what I did was I studied how expert entrepreneurs make financial investment decisions when facing what's called Knightian uncertainty, or an AKA total blackness, absolute, no way to understand or predict the nature and arrangement of the future. So what I did was I built a psychometric instrument to tap that. What stood in my favor was that I started that study in 2019, and we all know what happened in 2020, massive uncertainty. So without knowing it, I started that at the right time. I was one of the few people, I suppose, for whom the lockdowns and COVID and such worked in my favor. When it comes to this instrument, what I wanted to do was simplify things. So this is an extremely simple instrument to complete on the part of the respondent. There's a little bit of complexity in the middle that no one else other than me has to really worry about. And the outputs are very simple to interpret for someone like you if you were going to enter into a group coaching type scenario. When you talk about the rationale, the background, etc., I think it's a combination of personal experiences working in highly dysfunctional teams. I think also people like you and I, we've spent, I think I said this at the accreditation session, but we spent most of our adult lives trying to be intuitive around other human beings. Obviously from slightly different angles, you versus me and perhaps someone else. But a lot of folks, I figured, have really not got a lot of powers of intuition when it comes to interpersonal dynamics. And it's no indictment on them. It's just that it's not that something that they've really spent a lot of time on in their either professional careers or even personal environments. I think what I also figured is that we spend 8 hours a day sleeping, or we should. We spend about 8 hours a day working. And then we've only got another 8 hours to look after our kids, do some exercise, feed ourselves. Really life is pretty cramped in today's world. So if, let's say 33% of your life is spent working in a corporate environment, which is most people aren't entrepreneurs or business owners, they're employed, right? And they work in teams. And if their life spent in that team is a real series of bugbears, well, that's awful to contemplate for me. And I think all of us who've had a partner, a spouse, someone who kind of wakes up in the morning and says, oh my goodness, I really don't want to go to work today. It's generally not because of a process or an Excel spreadsheet or the artwork on the wall or whatever. It's due to somebody else. They don't get on with their boss. Their subordinates are viewed as lazy. The people on their level are giving them a hard time from their perception. But if we can sit down and do singular assessments, which is how this process runs, and then culminate in a group dynamics session under an expert coach, I believe we can smooth out a lot of kinks that don't even need to be kinks. They end up becoming, I use the word bugbears, they end up becoming bugbears without needing to. And I think that from an interpersonal dynamics perspective between workers within corporations, organizations, if we can make the working style between people better and more enjoyable, then, well, why wouldn't we on a 10-minute assessment? And so that was the rationale. Perhaps I haven't given you the scientific explanation that you were looking for. I can run into all the stats and the methods and the techniques, but I think for the purposes of your audience, perhaps that kind of background rationale is most useful.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think one of the important factors to kind of pay attention to, and these is an assessment like this, like all the other assessments that we are aware of, are inevitably in aim of understanding how to change work dynamics slightly with the people that you work with, right? Sometimes people have those very different personality types, and you know, sometimes they don't gel. But when you have a quick assessment that you can do and kind of look at what are the dynamics of this team, and you know, where are they sort of working together and working against each other, then suddenly you have a far better way of working as a high performing team. And I think that's why it's so what I love about the 10-minute kind of assessment is it's quick, it's easy, and it gives you information to kind of work through. And it's not a laborious process, and it doesn't take too long. But I mean, one of the questions that I have around practical application is, could you share some transformative examples where this assessment significantly impacted decision-making or performance improvement? Because I think it's giving us some ideas of, once the team has gone through this, what are some of the outcomes that you have experienced using the TWADI assessment?
Yeah, I can definitely give you some examples. I think, let me think of some interesting ones. So there was one team, they were a risk team, or are a risk team, at a major retailer. And what happened there was I went through each of the individual sessions of the constituent team members, which is part of the process, and looked at their data, unpacked for them. And what I noted initially was the team lead was someone who was really meeting avoidant, didn't like necessarily to collaborate, to build together. That's one of our data points that we look at, well, a couple of the data points. So when we got to the dynamics session that I was running, and I don't claim to be a coach, but of course, because I built this thing during the testing and validation phases, I'm the only one rolling it out. The team kind of, I think I would say they got courageous, they got bold, and they said to their team lead, the data is there. It's undeniable now. We've been wanting to tell you this for ages, but like, we need to meet with you. You need to get involved with us. We need to collaborate. We don't expect to live in your pocket, as it were, but we absolutely need more collaboration, more co-creation, and more FaceTime with you. We can't do our jobs effectively otherwise. So that was a more very functional one. There was another experience I had between an engineer and an executive. And of course, the engineer was an engineer's engineer, someone who loved deliberated outcomes, was uncomfortable unless they had all the data, wanted to sit and really flesh everything out, wanted to really be serious, but long-winded. and was a natural introvert, though, as well, despite being long-winded. And the data showed us this. Whereas the executive, as you might expect, wants a 10-minute update, wants to be short and sharp and gone, doesn't want deliberated outcomes. And these guys were knocking heads quite a lot. When you're able to sit them down in a room and actually plot that data out, and there's something powerful about people seeing a visual and being able to assign that visual to person A, person B, person C, and so on. They really sit and go, oh, wow, I didn't know that about you. And of course, it's a workplace-based assessment, so it's not about personal matters as such, even though the two are quite indistinguishable for the most part. And so in that case, with the engineer and the exec, they resolved to have daily meetings for 15 minutes at the beginning of the day, so that it's not a long meeting, it suits the exec, but it's a regular meeting, which suits the engineer. They can touch base. The engineer feels comfortable that he's getting more data. He might not be getting all the data. And when I say data, I mean environmental information, workplace information, things that he feels he needs for his job. And the exec feels that he's met the engineer halfway. So he's not avoiding having meetings, not avoiding having discussions, but he doesn't have to have long discussions that eat into his day that already consists of 10 or 12 meetings a day. So those are just some very practical examples of some of the things that we've come across. I think in other cases, what we found would be, we do measures of conflict as well, because every time you have humans in one place, the propensity for conflict is there. So we measure things like how comfortable folks are in moving through conflict-based situations, how forgiving they are post-conflict, and others like that. And so in those measures, we've had a couple of softer kind of revelations where Team members, in one case, I actually thought my system was misbehaving because I sat down with one individual and I said, you know, you're pretty low on the clemency, on forgiveness. It means that people should know that if they push you too far, they cross a line with you, there's a good chance they'll stay on the other side of that line for a while. And she was mildly, offended, shall we say. And then when we got to the team dynamics session, I showed the data up for everybody. And again, she put up her hand and she protested. And she couldn't really get through her protest because her team were in uproar. They were laughing, they were falling off their chairs, you name it. And I felt a little bad for her. But essentially, it turns out my system wasn't malfunctioning. It's just that she was in a bit of denial. So the team started citing instances of she wrote off that one from marketing last year, and she wrote off this one from the client side last month, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think without going down too many rabbit holes, those are some of the more interesting examples of where the rubber hits the road. Yeah.
So you spoke of constructs. So, you know, just to break it down for those who are interested, who are listening, don't you just want to run us through the 9 and then give us just a sort of a bit of the area of why this is a consideration? So, you know, just so people who are interested or listening kind of go, okay, cool, these are the constructs that we are measuring. And that would be interesting for a team to actually understand more about.
Sure. I think maybe a good place to start is what is a construct. It might not be patently clear for all folks out there. So within the social sciences in particular, we talk about constructs because a lot of what we're trying to measure is not perfectly tangible. So if I want to Kevin's likelihood or his proclivity to show something like loss aversion, or to be someone who's very outgoing. I can't see outgoing. I know what it is. I've felt it at times in my life. I can tell what it is when I see Kevin taking the microphone and commandeering the boardroom. But how do I measure it? How do I quantify it? How do I turn it into a science? Okay, so constructs essentially are representations of something that is real, but I cannot smell it, taste it, touch it. So with that in mind, we've got 9 global constructs. The first of which is called collaboration. So nothing too fancy there. So collaboration consists of 2 aspects. One is meeting frequency. So how often do I actually want these co-workers in my team to be meeting me versus how meeting avoidant am I? So some people are energized when they get that meeting request come through. Like they love the idea that they're going to be able to interact with other people. Others, like me, are the opposite of energized. It's like, oh no, another meeting. And interestingly, this is one of the most simple sub-constructs in the whole thing, but probably the most divisive to date. Meetings are just a divisive matter. But if I'm able to map out who in my team wants to hear from me and who wants to get an email instead, that's helpful. Okay. The other side of collaboration is what we call co-creation. So that is the extent to which you want to create shared outcomes, mutual outcomes, the extent to which you want to join hands with your team members versus run independently. The next global construct we have is called leadership independence. So it's how independently you want to work, not from your co-workers, but from your leadership. So from your line manager, your senior managers, your exco, whoever it might be. Some people feel as though they are being micromanaged and they've got someone breathing down their neck if they're constantly getting check-ins, daily meetings, whatever it might be. Others feel as though they've been put out in abandoned, put out to pasture if they're not getting that constant input.
Yeah.
The other thing we look at under leadership independence is called democracy. So it's the extent to which you expect to be involved in the workplace decisions that affect your working environment. Sometimes that's purely perceptual because sometimes these decisions and actions are going to happen above your head anyway. But it's good to know about people because certain people, if you don't take them aside and keep them in the loop, they're going to start looking for work elsewhere. Then we look at communications tendencies. So that's how often you want to have WhatsApp groups buzzing, emails flying through, phone calls coming in. And I think there we also look at depth. So it's the depth of communications. When I was telling you about the engineer and the exec, the engineer wants depth, the exec wants high level and then handle it and move on. So again, it's good to know about people because am I going to go to a meeting with Kevin and make it 15 minutes with 3 slides? Or does Kevin want me to come for as long as it takes to resolve whatever the issue is and make 50 slides? Helpful to be able to plot that out. Then we have what we call affability. So affability consists of outgoingness. I was just talking about outgoingness now. So that's the extent to which you want to give others attention, you want to receive attention, you want to be in the spotlight, and so on, versus the opposite, essentially. So a lot of us are the opposite. It's like your worst nightmare is someone thrusts a microphone in front of your face at the results presentation in front of all the shareholders, and you weren't expecting it,
Yeah.
Not great. And the other aspect of affability is connectedness. So that's the extent to which you feel that your identity is connected to this working team. It's the extent to which you put that banner over your head that I am ABC Marketing Limited's division. Okay. A lot of people, when you meet them, you often say, hey, tell me about yourself. And the first thing they say is, I'm in finance at XYZ Bank. Okay. Whereas, like, I've never felt that. When I was an employed individual, I was there for the salary. Didn't enjoy team building, none of that sort of stuff. People high on that, very much about things like team building. Then we look at decision-making styles. So that consists of the extent to which you prefer theory or practice. It's something that is more about, some folks really enjoy scenario planning, they enjoy theoretical decision-making, philosophical out there decision-making, that sort of thing. Others really want to be problem solvers. They want to exist at the proverbial coalface, and they would prefer to get things done here and now instead of what they would feel is kind of wafty out there, not making progress kind of thing. The second part of decision-making is haste. So it's the comfort you have with firing off decisions from the hip. When we go to the engineer and the executive, happy to fire things off and deal with whatever comes back later. Engineer, deeply insecure about doing that, only wants to make decisions once all the information's in. And then finally, we have confidence. So this is the extent to which you back the calls that you make. A lot of people are daunted by decision-making, and I think they should be not mollycoddled, but they should certainly be allowed the space to be less confident, especially because we get others who are very high on their decision-making confidence and almost too high. So it's not healthy to not second-guess yourself here and there. It's almost borders on arrogance in the workplace to not reflect. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And we mentioned conflict management. That's the next one. Here we look at levels of comfort in moving through conflict. This is not the extent to which people welcome conflict, but a lot of us are deeply uncomfortable in terms of conflict, and it's good to know. We get then a measure of clemency, so it's the extent to which you are forgiving towards others, and it's good to know this about team members. Those extremely high on this run the risk of being used because they signal that behaviors that were not okay are actually kind of okay because they just move on very quickly. Others are very low on this, probably need a bit of work because we can't just be writing people off left and right as soon as they do something. And then finally, we have assertiveness, which is the extent to which you're willing and able to call out behaviors that you don't like in the workplace. Finally, penultimately, we have measures of grit and resilience. So grit and resilience do exist out there and have been measured by others. I have operationalized them a little differently, but we have the extent to which people maintain their goals and maintain an affective emotional attachment to their goals. And then we also have the extent to which people, what is their breaking point when hard times hit. It's good to know about each other because some people need a little bit of TLC. Others move on very quickly and they bounce back to their baseline emotional state without too much difficulty. And then we have measures of patience. So we have what we call performance patience. So it's the extent to which you are going to be tolerant of poor performance from others in the team, low engagement, low morale, stuff that none of us really want to see. But as good as if I'm team lead, I can start to pick out who exactly I can assign the performance management process to, let's say, or the new intern, or someone who's floundering a little bit. And who should I definitely not assign that to? And then we have what we call temporal patience. I'll go back, engineer, executive. Temporal patience is the extent to which you can play a longer game. So executive running 3, 4, 5-year projects, only getting feedback every now and then, versus engineer who wants to leave work every day and point to exactly what was achieved and have that that environmental feedback happening rapidly. And then finally, we have social intuition. So this one is a much softer. It's the extent to which I feel understood within my working team. It's the extent to which I feel that I understand the others with whom I work. And then finally, social openness. So the extent to which I want a multitude of novel interpersonal relationships within my workplace. So I'll pause there. That's really probably even more than you asked for, but that's the crux of the 10-minute assessment outcome.
No, I think that sort of gives, you know, everyone who's interested or listening kind of a nice overview, because, you know, as you're speaking through them, you know, just in the last week, you know, speaking to some clients, confidence, you know, it's that intangible kind of thing that, you know, how do you measure that? Right, but when you hear it, you know, from a behavioral specialist, and you kind of go, okay, there are certain things that you can actually measure, and how much, you know, how much confidence do people have when they are making decisions or not making decisions? How avoidant are people around conflict? You know, and that's really important to know, because sometimes certain situations or certain positions or certain people are quite conflict averse, and they cannot get through it. And, you know, that's not great. You know, if you have difficult situations where you need someone to really step into that kind of assertiveness and ability to do that, you need to choose the right people for that. So I think that's what's beautiful about the dynamics of measuring the team to that degree, because then you do really understand. You know, some people are really great at being, you know, independent of the leader, and some people want the leader to, you know, stamp everything that and approve everything that they've done. But until we have some kind of relatable measurement of that, we can't, we won't know, because it's like you said in the beginning, it's an intangible, it's a construct that we have in our minds that we don't necessarily measure. But I mean, for businesses or practitioners interested in becoming accredited in TWADI, or the TWADI assessment, or those looking to incorporate it in their strategic decision-making processes, what advice would you offer? So, like, what are the key considerations they should keep in mind to maximize the value of TWADI assessments in their operations?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is I would really advise not to run the assessment in isolation. By that, I mean, I've decided to take this to market through, as I say, highly reputable coaches, psychometrists, and psychologists, some of whom you met at your own accreditation session that you went through. And I think you can attest to the fact that there were high-quality practitioners in attendance. And so really the outcome of this is not the report. Yes, there are several reports that will be made available. And I've found so far in the validation process that it really lands, and a lot of working teams go and they print it out and put it up in their cubicles so that they can kind of reference who's who, you know, on the go. But essentially, where the real power lies is to scaffold people like you, coaches, into a greater understanding of group dynamics. This particular assessment, I wouldn't advise it be run on an individual. It wasn't built for that. It was built for working teams. So whether it's an existing client of yours or perhaps a new client where you've never even met the individuals in the team, you could run this assessment, no mess, no fuss, 10 minutes each, and you can, before you even meet with them, get a really great sense of the data, a really great sense of who's who, how the team composition looks, how it's configured, who maybe needs a little help, or maybe it's a situation where everybody's like really nicely aligned, but a bit of coaching would be great to put them into an uncomfortable zone and help them to grow. As one example. So I think the first response I'd have to you essentially is that the power is in having high quality practitioners making use of the data that comes out. I think you could save 20 coaching hours, maybe more, by being fast-tracked into that team. I think another way of really making use of this nicely is to understand that, and this is my view, this is not in the scientific literature as such, but my view is that 99% of people would like to work better together. They actually would. We might have the 1% who have antisocial personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder. They exist out there in corporate, we know this. But I honestly believe that 99% would like to, if they could understand one another better. And so what better way to understand one another than to run an assessment like this that exists simultaneously at the group and the individual level, and then to enter into a group coaching process. And that group coaching process does not have to be an endless thing. You know, psychotherapy feels like an endless thing, but most coaching interventions are pretty short term. And I think that the relative value of having a successful coaching process at the group level across the working groups in an organization just cannot be understated. That's a serious investment in actual people development. We talk about people development where we're all going to go for half a day and do team building, or we're going to go off for half a day and have a fancy lunch and drink too much wine. And yeah, that's all great. I mean, the socialization aspect within an organization is great for bond formation and such. But helping people to actually work better together, understand each other better, and accommodate each other, we have the full belief that that's going to come out in the bottom line, especially through group coaching, where we can actually see eye to eye. So I think that would be my answer in a nutshell. Yeah.
Fantastic. Sean, and thank you so much for joining us. We've already covered our half an hour chat for today's podcast. Is there anything else you want to leave the audience with today in terms of the team and work dynamics inventory assessment? Is there anything you want to leave the audience with that would be useful?
Yeah, I think given that we're running low on time, anyone who's interested, feel free to reach out to me or reach out direct to Kevin. I mean, Kevin's becoming very well acquainted, let's say, with the instrument. I think the other thing to mention, as I did at the beginning, is there are two more instruments coming. One is a very unique 360 assessment that's meant for middle management, and especially middle management who we're looking to create or turn into leaders. We recognize that it's a real pain point for a lot of big businesses, that transition from middle to senior management. And the second, or the third one rather, coming, called the Global Executive Dynamics Inventory, and that is otherwise known as JEDI. I built that with a professor and good friend, and that's really for executive teams. That's an anonymous assessment, so we all, as a team, submitted anonymously, so we've got freedom to really say what we feel, and we report only at the group aggregate level, but it creates a ton of talking points. And yeah, so anyone interested in those, please feel free to reach out to me. I think there's power in taking data and making it human-centric and creating greater understandings of one another. But yeah, otherwise, thank you kindly.
Absolutely. Guys, so that was Dr. Sean Smith speaking through the team and workplace dynamics inventory. Like you said, if you want to know more, please get into contact with myself or him. And it's psychonomics.co.za, right?
That's it, Psychonomics.
And all the links and everything will be in the description boxes below. Dr. Sean Smith, thank you so much for joining me, and thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for your time. Much appreciated.
Chat soon.
Cheers.